I was interviewing somebody for a product marketing role. I found myself wondering, like, did this guy just ask ChatGPT for a product marketing framework? I have no idea if this is coming from his expertise, his lived experience, or he's just very good at prompting the LLM and then walking us through the answer. What will really cook your brain is, does it fucking matter? Does it matter if his experience is real? Maybe it's perfectly fine that he's very good at using AI to quickly get up to speed with something and present a realistic plan of execution.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Hooman Radfar.
Welcome to today's show. That's right, we got a new voice on the panel today. Hooman is an old friend of mine. Way back in the day, we were muckraking in Silicon Valley. Hooman, I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
On this week's show, we're going to talk about Waymo raising a crap ton of money to roll out their driverless cars. Are they going to destroy Uber? Are they going to redefine transportation as we know it? What's going to really happen there? We're also going to talk about Sam Altman's WorldCoin, formerly known as WorldCoin. They're launching new orbs to thousands of locations. What does this mean? What does it mean to verify human beings, and how does it relate to AI? And we're also going to talk about Apple releasing a research paper saying that LLMs don't really reason. Do these large language models, these ChatGPTs, this generative AI, are they really reasoning? How do we really know? And what does it mean if they are? What does it mean if they're not? And what happens next? All that and much more on today's show. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right, before we jump into it, we're going to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which says if you've listened to just a few of our episodes and gotten value, we only ask for a few things in return, which is to subscribe to us on YouTube, give us a follow on your favorite podcasting app, and give us a shout out on your favorite social network. It helps us grow the show and help more founders like you. All right, with that, let's jump right into it. On this week's show, we have a new guest. Hooman, welcome to the show. Since it's your first time, tell us a bit about yourself.
I have been doing startups for as long as I've been doing anything, nearly 20 years. Tough to say. Started my career in the social media and marketing side, founding a company called Add This. Add This was one of the largest personalization platforms in the web. We had an embedded service with 15 million customers that drove 2 billion unique users, and then ended up switching sides to helping founders, working with my friend Garrett Camp at Expa as a founding partner there, where we got to work on building and investing in some amazing companies in the pre-seed and seed stage. And now I'm serving founders at scale with my new company, Collective. And Collective is the first online back office that's designed for freelancers, consultants, independents. So there's 26 million of them in the US, 38% of the workforce. And we are working hard so they can focus on what they love, their passions, not their paperwork. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. Actually, I've been looking into Collective and it is epic. I am about to switch to Collective. So anyone who's out there who's...
I know a guy. You might get a discount. I don't know.
Great. Awesome. You mentioned Expa there and Garrett Camp. I mean, for those who are listening who may not know all the inside baseball, right? We have Emil Michael on the show very often. He is the former chief business officer at Uber and one of the most senior people there. And Garrett was one of the co-founders of Uber along with Travis Kalanick. And so Expa is an awesome incubator, accelerator, studio, built a bunch of awesome stuff. And Garrett, of course, is a mutual friend and done some incredible stuff in his career. So only the best on the Startup Podcast Reacts panels. So I really appreciate you joining him, and you're a rock star. So let's jump into the first topic today. Speaking of Uber, we wanted to talk about Waymo's funding announcement and how that might affect them, the ecosystem for rideshare and autonomous vehicles, And also, I know they have a relationship with Uber. Some people think they're going to kill Uber. Some people think they're going to supercharge Uber. Hooman, you mentioned talking about this one, so maybe set it up for us. What's the background on Waymo? What's the background on this funding? And then let's unpack it together.
My understanding, and I think the news is fluid, is they have had successive rounds very quickly. As many of the people know here, Waymo is a division in Google. I wish it was a private company very, very badly that we could all invest in, because I believe very strongly that it's incredibly disruptive and it's silently changing the world around us every day. For folks who are in San Francisco, you see them. They're proliferating like crazy. To me, I think it's funny. We all watched the Elon Musk huge show that he put on. We were all like waiting in anticipation. And everyone's like, wow, is he going to solve self-driving cars? And I literally, took a Waymo back and forth from work that morning. So it feels a little bit odd to me that discussion is happening on a national scene as if self-driving isn't already on its way. From my perspective, starting with Uber, Travis and, Garrett, to their credit, saw this coming. They created I think it was ATG was the group in Pittsburgh that was doing self-driving. So this has been on their radar.
Advanced Technologies Group. That was the group inside Uber that was building autonomous vehicle tech.
That's right. But, when Dara came on, and he came onto a platform that required a lot of changes, a lot of work, made the decision to cut that. And now here we are. They don't have their own internal autonomous technology, and the world is changing. So the open question is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and the new breaking news here is that they've closed a $5.6 billion Series C funding round led by, parent company Alphabet, as well as the who's who of Silicon Valley venture firms.
Andreessen, I think Silver Lake,
Fidelity, Tiger Global, Perry Creek.
And the valuation, I think, was 50 billion, something along those lines, right?
Yeah, crazy, crazy numbers, which is, deservedly so. This is, we talked on the last React episode, which is actually a couple of weeks ago now, about the robot day that Elon hosted. And as you said, you touched on this lightly, right? It's like everyone's excited about Elon bringing on the advent of self-driving. And I'm like, excuse me, we do self-driving every day here in San Francisco. And there was a lot of comments saying, you don't get it. You're just an Elon hater. These are fully autonomous, computer vision. They can go anywhere, do anything. And Waymo is based on maps, and it's based on predetermined routes and blah, blah, blah. And this is completely different. But the point is that the application, the use case of driving a large population of people in large cities to largely arbitrary destinations is the truth, is our everyday lived experience in San Francisco. And Waymo is making that real. And, Hooman, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Uber partnership, but, Dara shut down ATG and a bunch of other big bets. And one might argue that put Uber in a weaker position vis-a-vis the long-term strategy and upside, or in a stronger position vis-a-vis profitability and cleaning up a lot of the loose threads. But we saw autonomous driving as an existential threat. We saw it as like something we need to own. But maybe that's not the case now. Maybe the way it's playing out is Dara is more cooperative instead of combative. And he's like, I'll have some of that, thanks. Let's partner on the operations side and roll it out. So how do you think the funding, the relationship with Uber, what does this ultimately do? Do they end up being two independent companies with a little overlap, or does Waymo become a vendor to the rideshare companies?
So I think the challenge that Uber is going to face is fundamentally Waymo is part of Google, and they have an incredible distribution engine at bear. And as you know from your career, distribution can be game changing. So if you look at it, the company that controls the largest mobile operating system in the world that can force defaults, right? And we've seen that. Hey, you want the new version of Android? You're going to default Waymo, right? Is going to have their own ride sharing network. So one of the huge advantages a two-sided marketplace has, in particular Uber, is they have the consumers, right? So if Waymo was going to have a problem getting consumers, I'd say, okay, well, Uber is the way to do it. I don't believe they're going to have that problem. Number one, because it's Google. And then even so, if you go look at just the level of interest, starting with San Francisco, they had 100,000 plus people sign up for this thing before it was even in motion. I mean, you can't even get one of the things. So I think those two forces make the one side of the network quite trivial. So then you argue to yourself, well, what value add is Uber going to provide to Waymo? And so it's tough. And as an enlightened consumer, you remember when Uber used to have the taxis, right? I don't know about you, but I don't order taxis through Uber. And I don't think Uber wants taxis in most of it, because it turns out adding $2, $3 to a taxi isn't a good deal for anybody, right? Nobody wants that. It's not worth it. And so I think the same thing could happen with Waymo. Sure, of course, it's in Waymo's self-interest to partner with as many people as possible, get the brand out there, get people using it. But if I am just talking to myself as a consumer, the minute I take a Waymo in a new city X, why would I not just download that app? Just like I have Lyft and Uber, for example, as a consumer, why would I not have Waymo? And so I think they're in a dangerous position. And I'll give you like one other, thought. When I kind of was thinking about investing in Uber myself, and when these guys were kind of taking off, the realization that I had that kind of made Uber magic in my mind was, I think originally when people thought about Uber, and this dates, I think both of us, they were thinking about it in competition with the taxi limo market, which order of magnitude is was $10 billion, right? So how big is this company going to be? Like you wouldn't have envisioned a $150 billion S&P 500 company, but the disruption was not that Uber just took that market. It was that it took a share of the car market. I wrote this Medium post, God, I don't even remember how long ago it was, to kind of just walk through my math, and I posted and it got shared quite a bit. And it basically was my own economics in San Francisco. And I realized I shouldn't own a car.
I think I remember that post. But so here, I've got some counter arguments for you. Okay.
Sure.
You talked about distribution. I know actually I was running the Uber developer platform and running Point on the integration with Google Maps. So, in Google Maps, you can order an Uber. And we thought this was like the bee's knees of integrations. This is going to be epic. We're going to drive massive new rides and incremental rides from this integration. Turns out Google Maps does not have intent to ride, right? It has intent to drive. It has intent to book. It has intent to understand your surroundings or walk. It does not have intent to ride. That may have evolved as people have gotten used to ordering rideshare from Google Maps. But it's interesting how subtle muscle memory and human behavior is when you would think a mapping app with intent to be somewhere else could generate the kind of intent to ride that the Uber app itself was generating. And the answer was a big fat zero. And so it's not clear to me that Google has intent to ride the way they think they do when you talk about distribution. The other is you talked about great defaults. Yes, maybe they can manufacture intent. A term that I used to use at Uber a lot. But they're going to may start running into SEC problem, right?
Sure.
They're all, Lena Khan is like finding any reason to, shoot people in the head.
We'll see how our employment goes, by the way, in the next, 2 weeks.
That's right. But, there is a bit of a chill in the air about these, let's call them corporate synergies. And so that's a headwind. The other thing is I just don't think of Google as being an incredible operations company. Operations meaning, human customer interactions in the real world. At Uber, we used to call this about bits and atoms. They're very good at bits. They're not very good at atoms. Now, of course, they're good at like data centers and they're good at whatever, cleaning their offices, but then they're not good at like customer facing operations and depots and cleaning and, all this sort of stuff. So, if we're talking about Amazon, maybe Airbnb, even Airbnb doesn't even do operations. I would be a bit more optimistic about Alphabet's appetite. I don't even mean their competence. I just mean their appetite to get into that game. And then finally, you talked about why would I want to do this inside the Uber app? Number one, I'm not sure if you're saying I want to just go install the Waymo app and I don't have the Uber margin. I'm not sure if there's an exclusivity in the countries that they're launching with Uber. I don't know are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure. And look, I think all of these, are going to be valid potential headwinds. I just think the economics of it are where it's going to stop, right? So like back to that article that I was talking about. So I kind of redid it again. Mm-hmm. And if you, in my head, and I was thinking about kind of posting almost like a mirror and like pointing back to that. But for me to own a car in San Francisco, like basically, I think if you look at the fully loaded cost of ownership of a car, and I'm doing this in my head, so listeners beware, but let's say it's like $10,000, $15,000 a year. And let's say it boils down to, you're going to take 2 to 3 rides per day. Right. But you need it to cost about, I believe it's like $10 per ride to be the equivalent of a car in the city. Now, Uber cannot do that now. They're hitting a terminal limit on the cost. They have squeezed out as much gross margin as they can. They're paying the drivers this amount they can. But fundamentally, there is a driver there. And at some point with economies of scale, when you look at Waymo in production, they are going to offer you at a radically different price perspective. And that is the inherent disruption that's occurring in the economics. They're going to come and say, hey, you know what? Surge pricing in the morning, it costs me from Pack Heights to my office sometimes $30. I will always charge you $10. Period, full stop.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The way we thought about this inside at Uber, and this is quite a time ago now, is that even with autonomous vehicles, they might provide the baseline supply capacity, but you would always need this kind of elastic load shedding to drivers because you could never get enough inventory, assets on the road in order to solve that elastic problem. But the idea would be that overall, you would drive the costs down, but you would be able to maintain incredible ETAs, which people care deeply about, actually. And so our hypothesis at Uber was that it would always be a hybrid fleet, that you'd have a fixed supply of owned assets or autonomous assets, and that in peak times, you needed to surge into human beings, but with the autonomous fleet, you'd be able to drive the cost down of the overall experience.
It's possible, but then the question is that $150 billion company that's left? Because if they don't own the core and I'm Google and I'm looking and saying, well, okay, Uber's worth $150 billion. I'm going to argue to you, I bet you Waymo, again, we have to see if the technology goes. There's a lot of if statements. I don't know why that can't be worth $1 trillion. Go look at the TAM for the car market. And I'm telling you, they're fully going to take car market TAM. It's a very, very significant disruption if you look at the economics.
I think this is really interesting, right? And I think it's difficult to model out how it plays, but I think Uber's bet is we are the everything real-time logistics company. This is not my own invention. This is something that Dara said. We are the application layer onto Waymo's hardware layer, right? And so, yeah, they're a vendor to us, whatevs, right? They're like a display, they're a laptop. We are the software layer. We're the demand layer, the marketplace layer, the operations layer. Does that vacuum out their enterprise value? Maybe, but you can also start putting other things into those packets, right? Like food and groceries and whatever. Uber has all of those relationships, right? With Starbucks and with Walgreens and with everything. So again, at Uber, to kind of talk about how we thought about it at Uber, the car was a packet on a network, on a packet switch network. Then, right, what do you put in the packet? Waymo has no earthly ability to do any of that shit because they haven't got the relationships, they haven't got the inventory levels, they haven't got and so you could pack that packet with drugs, with legal drugs, with pizzas, with human beings, with whatever. We have no idea.
I think that there's a DoorDash component in the business. So I'm not arguing. I mean, as we know, Uber has multiple lines of business. I'm just talking about the core riding business. I think Waymo will take a stepwise, almost embracing extend. They're not going to appear threatening, in particular because they have that Google DNA, and they will partner and they will supply hardware. And I agree with that. All I'm arguing is that at a certain point, they're going to be like, wait a minute, I have the app. I have the support. They are not just a back-end service. They are a consumer-facing brand that is incredibly high demand and is proven in San Francisco. And I'll kind of like end with this point. I'm waiting for this moment, but what can happen? When you look at San Francisco, I will be really curious to see at the end of next year what Waymo's market share is of rideshare versus Uber. I'm also curious to see at the end of next year in the emerging markets, how fast they're repeating that model, because now they're starting to go into new markets, and I'm sure you've followed that. Some analyst, now we'll go over to our friends in New York, is going to be like, wait a minute, hold on. And they are going to downgrade that stock at some point, or they're going to start issuing statements. That is what's going to cause Uber the largest problems in terms of their ability to handle it, because right now they're flying high with this incredible stock price and well-deserved. I'm actually not counting Dara out of the race. There's a lot of tools that they have to manage this, but they have a limited amount of time, because once the analysts catch on to the story, and real data is getting produced, by the way, and it will be very hard for them because their currency that they're going to use to navigate, which is their stock, whether they buy, build, partner, is going to potentially get hit. And so it's going to be an interesting race. I got to imagine they're thinking about this all day, every day. It's like a real existential threat.
1000%. I can tell you in San Francisco, the Uber user experience has gone to shit. ETAs have jumped, the prices have jumped, and I'm regularly encouraged to check Waymo. The only thing going for Uber is the Waymo ETA is generally the same. It's almost exactly the same every time. So I'm like, why am I waiting 15 minutes for an Uber ride? And I'm like, open the Waymo app and it's like 15 minutes or 12 minutes, 13 minutes. I'm like, far out. And so, yeah, it's very, very interesting. With that debate, I love the debate. Be sure to join us down in the comments and share your thoughts. What do you reckon? Is Uber screwed? The economics just not in their favor? Or are they going to ultimately partner and become incredible bedfellows? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, guys. All right, moving on to topic 2. This is now a couple of weeks old because we haven't had a Reacts episode for a couple of weeks, sadly. Sam Altman's company, a company he founded, CEO of OpenAI, of course, he founded another company that was called WorldCoin. He did this actually before OpenAI, and it was a crypto play. And it's been recently renamed to just World. And the idea is that they have this kind of facial scanning technology They will scan your face in this high fidelity, it's kind of like Face ID on steroids. And they will create this hardcore fingerprint of your face. And they call them orbs. These things were sort of hard to find, hard to locate, hard to use. They've released a new generation and they're deploying thousands of these things everywhere. And they're making them, more delightful to use and so on. The message really from their event, they were kind of had an event to announce all of this, was, hey, in a world of AI, verifying human beings is going to be very important. I've said this, I'm sure you've said this, Hooman, we've all said this, but it carries a little bit of different weight when Sam Altman says this, right? And he's like, hey guys, we kind of creating a problem here. We need to verify that there's a human in the loop, that there is a human intent, a human present, or perhaps human authorship. He's stripped away the word coin from the thing, so it's no longer about crypto. And he's leaning into the AI use case. And I think this is very telling for Sam Altman to be involved with. I think it touches on many of the themes and concerns we've talked about on this show many, many times around the potential for impact to the economy. And we're talking way before Skynet here. It's interesting that Sam Altman is on both sides of this equation. So, Hooman, you saw these announcements, you saw the new orbs, you saw their plans to roll them out into retail spaces all over the country and eventually the world. In fact, I think they're emphasizing the global nature of this. What do you make of World? What do you make of Sam Altman's involvement? And what do you make of this existential problem of verifying humanity moving forward?
So, I was lucky enough to invest in a company called Onfido in the UK. They sold, I think, for $650 million. They'd been working on identity verification. And actually, ironically, one of their largest customers were these crypto exchanges or sets of customers. So when you were going on to an exchange, in order to have some transactions of volume, you would have to use your ID, right? So that was the initial use case. Do I know Chris is Chris? And we need to do it at scale. We want to sign up because the longer it takes me and the more expensive it is to find out who Chris is, that impacts the crypto exchange's onboarding time and consequently how much transactions is going on. So that's where I think you saw a huge flurry of this identity verification technology and innovation occur. Crypto actually, ironically, was responsible for that. And there was a pretty large competition and there have been some exits and so on and so forth. Now you take that problem and you think about it. Why is identity verification so critical path in the world of AI? Well, institutions and our ability to collaborate as a society, in my opinion, fundamentally hinge on trust. I need to know that you are you in order to interact. If I don't know who anyone is, and we'll discuss this, I think, more, and also what did you do? Like, is this content from you? Is this content real? Right? But it does start with verifying and originating agents. Let's talk about humans as the first agent. So I think the vision behind it is correct. I think there's going to be a lot of debate though, because this is a very sensitive issue. Like the United States has a huge bias towards privacy. It's nothing compared to the EU. Whereas you look at China, they're doing facial recognition everywhere. From a user experience, it's seamless, right? You can go to airports and you're just like walking through and so on and so forth. So ultimately, I think we all believe as technologists, there's a possibility and there's a world where I could walk in any store, any airport. Why am I taking out a piece of plastic as my token to say this is me, right? In theory, I shouldn't have to. You should just know it's me. And then there's a set of services and privileges associated with me, right? But who should we trust? Who are we going to let be that service? Now, his point of view, it's evolving originally because it might be like OpenAI and not be so open over time, but was, okay, well, we can't really trust anyone. So let's try a decentralized solution where you own it. In the US, if you've noticed in airports, especially San Francisco, they're starting to take pictures and do face IDs, right? It's like coming. And so I think as a society, we're going to have to, it starts with, again, who you are is, there's a multi-factor way of defining you. There's your image, there's your voice, there's biometrics. And so I think there is a very strong need for someone to help solve this identity problem, but there is also it is very threatening to have a third party own all this as well. Like, do you trust the US government to do it? Do you trust a company to do it? Apple's Face ID, which you mentioned, they take a point of view where, it's your face is securely stored on the enclave, right? Like it's encrypted. They don't store your face in some cloud somewhere, right? And that's why I trust Apple. So they use it. I have my authentication device. So in short, I'm very excited about it, but I think it's super early days. And the reason I think this is a hard problem is not technical anymore. It is, how do you architect a solution where everyone can get the outcome that they want, which is identity verification, without the privacy and power dynamic issues of creating like a tool for an authoritarian whatever regime.
this problem becomes very complicated because it's multi-layered, right? It's not only do I need to verify you are you need to verify that your intent is real. So are you actually pressing that button or intending to buy that thing or to transfer the ownership of that house? Is your content real, right? Or is it completely manufactured by LLMs? And then is your expertise real? Because if anybody can ask, an LLM to generate what appears to be expert content, like it's unclear. I don't know, Hooman, are you legit? I have no idea. Or is half your shit generated by LLM? And I can't tell, if your expertise is real or not, right? People are going to be able to replicate podcasts. They are replicating podcasts with, Notebook LM. So this whole thing is entirely redundant at this point. But there are multiple layers of verifying a human being, their identity, their presence, their intent, their content, their expertise. Boy, oh boy, it's a real problem. And we've talked about this idea that even before jobs are disrupted, even before wars and conflict is disrupted, even before the superintelligence takes over and points the guns at us, there is just this very basic thing of we won't know who to trust and what to trust. And there are going to be human beings driving these things. So we talk about alignment with human intent, but it's the humans who have the intent to deceive. So alignment doesn't really solve that problem.
Well, foundationally, the first problem is the tech, right? And it's very basic. Is Chris? And that a reductionist view is that's the hard part. That's not the hard part. It's all of that surrounding stuff. So let's say I know with 100% certainty in the airport, Chris is Chris. But to your point, like what is Chris' intention? If Chris is walking by a store, when and what has to be true for you to authorize that payment? And hey, okay, so I know that Chris. When is it that Chris took the photo with the iPhone so that I can then attribute that photo with Chris and that time, and date and location? Because, look, we're in a very interesting time. And as AI is going up and to the right, the same tools that are arming us to create and collaborate at scales that we never thought before are arming folks to have malicious intent, right? Like I gave you the example when we were talking about my mom. Like if somebody calls my mom and says, hey, it's Hooman. They sample my voice for 30 seconds and they go ahead and say, hey, mom, I need you to wire me money right now. I'm busy. And they go ahead and do it. The only way to prevent that is for to have some sort of verification and say, you know what? This isn't Hooman. It's a critical invention.
It's not just verification, right? In the case of your mom, all our moms, it's verification and some interstitial layer, some UX and some level of not training, but like general understanding that I need to be looking for the green light. Like this is actually Hooman. I mean, to this day, you see posts on whatever, Facebook and whatever, people copying and pasting. Facebook is going to sell your data unless you copy and paste this message and post it.
That's right.
And all these, like I'll say illiterate, not in a pejorative way. They're illiterate about the technology in a genuine way. They still don't know it to this day. So how do you teach, our mums, our cousins to look for the identity verification signal? And then you talked about, this has to be an open protocol. Do we really trust companies to do this? But it's interesting, in the same breath, you said the only company I'm trusting right now is Apple, which is the ultimate walled garden company, right?
I'll amend that slightly. It's not that I only trust Apple. It's that their approach is one that technically they have limited their own access to the data through cryptographic security and pushing an enclave. So I think the design of the system, it gives me trust in the way that they're moving forward necessarily. I don't know if I trust Apple as a whole, right? I mean, I'm not saying I do or don't, but I do trust that particular system. And I think we need to design a system ideally that would, it's almost like a human being or something like that. Like, hey, you recognized me. Great. You can, call up my identity for the purpose of instant verification, but you have to immediately delete that information. And, there's just a lot of things that have to occur,
Let me give you a great case study of this. I was interviewing somebody for a product marketing role. And one of the steps was do some homework around this product marketing problem. And he came to the homework jam session with an incredibly detailed and thoughtful framework for how the product marketing should work. And it was like textbook and clear and concise and well articulated. I found myself wondering, like, did this guy just ask ChatGPT for a product marketing framework? I have no idea if this is coming from his expertise, his lived experience, or he's just very good at prompting the LLM and then walking us through the answer. And this is what I meant by that last layer, right? Of who you are, your intent, your content, and your experience. I don't know if your experience is real. Now, what will really cook your brain is, does it fucking matter? Does it matter if his experience is real? Maybe it's perfectly fine that he's very good at using AI to quickly get up to speed with something and present a realistic plan of execution. Then you start asking yourself like questions around the things we used to value: experience, memorized knowledge, college training. That shit doesn't matter. What matters is, do you know how to use the tools? In this case, like these days, a lot of prompting, but the emerging tools to quickly get up to speed with any problem at any time. And, at Uber, we used to look for horsepower. This is almost like AI power. Do you know how to use the tools? Doesn't matter what your background is.
I think, though, fundamentally, I'll say the shape of it is similar to the productivity revolution that was introduced through PCs and the unlocks what came out from the internet. So what I mean by that is this: what is a person at work trying to do? Fundamentally, I want to pay the least amount of people to do the most amount of work quickly, right? And so if said person in your example came back and said, hey, I did this all with AI, my first reaction might be, well, if the outcome is good and you can do it at a lower cost. I mean, one of the things we talk about Collective is Instagram sold for $1 billion and there was 13 people, right? And at Collective, we're focusing on solopreneurs. What has to be true for there to be $1 billion business of one? Now, it's a construct. And then I started seeing Sam Altman, by the way, has a very similar thing. Him and his friends have that bet. Let me give you one that's more close that can happen. What's stopping 5 people from building $100 million business? And the answer is that deadly close. But I still think it's the same metrics that you're already looking at. Hey, I want people that can do more with less. Okay, the first generation of them were like, I know how to use computers and I know how to use Office and I know how to use internet and I know how to do research and I go faster. This next generation can take it even faster. So I think with their business context will reward them for output. I think that's a great use of AI. Now, the negative part of it is, okay, let's take our malicious actors and we're in election day. So, people are like, all right, I want to influence an outcome on an election or an issue and whatever. And I figured out how to game Facebook. So I'll start organically and I'll create these fake organic video posts. And then I'll do promoted posts and I'll use the marketplace to take whatever content is kind of trending and tip, and the fact remains is without this verification, back to our previous point, I mean, dude, you're fucked. Because if you can't I like the way you're thinking about the green dot, but there's verification systems now, like the blue check mark that's famous on Twitter and so on and so forth.
Well,
if we don't have the equivalent,
the meaning of that blue check mark has completely changed.
It's eroded.
Yes.
Sure. But if there's not some equivalent where people can ascribe some level of trust to, what you're doing is ultimately, if that content is in line with your ideology, it defends your case, you're willing to accept that might be true. And the danger is not actually that people don't, ultimately, there's a lot of good checks and balances now. People are like, you'll find some of these videos, this has been debunked. It's too fucking late because we have a 15-minute turn to 15-second economy of information. And so you need to know as it's getting viral that this is fake. And so this verification problem is, to me, one of the biggest issues on the internet. And it's going to get so bad if we don't, as a society, I truly believe Apple, Adobe, anyone who has the ability to originate and create content through video and photos and then also edit them, truly, they need to have a protocol that they all adopt that we can say content is true or false. If we do not do that within the next 5 to 10 years, then the institutions erode, the trust erodes, and then it's basically who's screaming the loudest and who knows how to do that. And that's a dangerous place to live.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically already there, right? It's just that this supercharges it tenfold, 100-fold, right? We're already producing misinformation that we can't verify, we don't understand. There's that old saying that a lie will go halfway around the world before the truth even puts on its pants. I mean, a lie will change the conversation entirely before the truth has a chance to even emerge. Just to go back to that point you raised about the billion-dollar company with one person, it's hard to judge providence here, but actually we had Ben Parr on the show with Jeremiah Ouyang, and we were talking, Ben raised this idea of a billion-dollar company with 3 people. And Jeremiah posted that on LinkedIn and it went viral. We had he had 1 million views. And then we started hearing Sam Altman talk about it. And this is not outside the realm of possibility.
We need to go do some research so we can figure out who's the first to it.
Yeah, I'm sure many people had this idea at the same time independently. But it was interesting because we talked about it very early on and it went very, very viral. And we've heard a lot of people talk about it since. My hypothesis is that we'll have an executive team So, a marketer, a financial officer or whatever, and then they're just using their whole team as LLMs and agents. Look, it's a fascinating problem. Verification is definitely in the mix, if not the silver bullet to solve it, along with a few other bits and pieces. And so I think it's very telling. The takeaway here for founders, for operators, for investors, for people who care about the world is, Sam Altman has a view of the future. He's in the lab. He knows what's coming. He knows what's possible. He's telling us through his behavior, his investments, and his associations that this is a serious problem. I would say threat. And he's betting on solving it. And I think a number of other smart people are betting on solving it. And we better be paying attention to it. And there is a closed version of this. There's an open version of this. There's a fragmented version of this. There's a unified version of this. And it's going to be a lot of pain until we get to the bottom of it.
I agree. And I think I'll say something, maybe it's radical, maybe it's obvious, but people talk a lot about the threat of AI. And I think there's a lot of fear mongering. I'm an optimist. I actually think that there's a lot of positive ways that we can move society forward. It's an inevitability that AI is going to come. You can debate AGI, you can debate all this stuff, but AI is going to be more and more commonplace. It's going to integrate everything we're doing. So there's people saying we're going to be out of jobs and all that. To me, the social unrest, the threat to the social fabric of AI is the number one threat that we need to attack as a group. And it's solvable. I say this with optimism, but if we don't just acknowledge that the cost of content creation is dropping to zero and the quality of said content is going to the highest fidelity possible, and that can create, again, so distrust, we need to address that problem first and foremost, in my opinion. If we do not do that, the problem is we'll be killing each other before AI comes to kill us, right? And so we need to be able to have to solve all problems. The requirement is we have to have institutions, trust, and communication. We can't do that if we don't know what's right. That to me is a big problem. Hopefully we'll solve it as a society. I think we will, but I do think it's going to come from these ironically big companies instituting some of these standards. Good news, bad news. It's not that many companies left. I mean, talking about 10 companies get together, they can probably fix it.
All right. Well, what do you guys think? Are we going to kill ourselves before AI has a chance to kill us? We didn't really discuss this, but do you trust Sam Altman to be the one to try to solve this problem and kind of be on both sides of the equation? Is Apple, as a private company that's prioritizing privacy, the one that's going to do it? Is it open protocols? Where do you see this question of verification of identity, verification of intent, verification of expertise? Where is that going? Does it even matter if someone doesn't have that expertise? Join us in the comments. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll join you down there as well.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
Let's move on to the next topic, which is related to this. We've been giving large language models and generative AI and AI in general an awful lot of credit on this show and on many previous shows. But this is actually a bit of a counter argument or counter narrative to this. Apple has released a paper, and their researchers have been digging deep into the question of, can large language models really reason, or are they just regurgitating what they've indexed off the web? And this is a really big question. Sam Altman has said before, and actually others have said before, well, if you ask an LLM a really hard question or a really easy question, it takes the same amount of time to answer. And that was evidence that it's not really thinking. It's just spitting out tokens. And so then Sam Altman's like, hold my beer. They launched O1. It takes the question, it unpacks it, it reframes it, it comes up with a series of steps. They're calling it a reasoning model, right? And if you have access to O1, it's really quite incredible what it does. And it goes through a series of reasoning steps. Hard problems take longer to answer. Easy problems take less time to answer. And so that little debate, that little signal of maybe this thing isn't really reasoning, dissipated a little bit, right? Like, oh, okay, this new O1 model is really, really reasoning. But then the Apple researchers like, hold my beer. They're like, let's dig into this. All right, we're using standardized testing to test their reasoning ability, right? Like IQ and standardized tests and taking the bar exam. And we're saying, hey, wow, these things are passing the bar exam. And these things are passing standardized tests. So what the Apple engineers did is they changed the questions slightly, the standard questions, from like Harry did this to Sally did this, or they did 3, bottles or 2 bottles. And they just changed the details of the question without changing the nature or architecture of the question. And what happened was that these models dramatically dropped in their efficacy in trying to take these standardized tests. With the hypothesis being, the implication being, they were indexing these tests. They were either being fed them explicitly to try to increase the benchmarks, or they're just finding them on the web. Once you change some of the subtleties of the nature of the test, the LLMs start to shit the bed. They're regurgitating, not thinking. I think this is super fascinating. One of the first things that blew my mind about LLMs is when I was listening to a researcher on This American Life, a Microsoft researcher, and he was talking about vetting ChatGPT 4 when they were doing diligence for the investment in OpenAI. And he had access to GPT-4 early. And he was like a veteran researcher. And he's like, he's not some newbie, just, guy playing with the model. He's an AI guru. And he was like, I asked ChatGPT 3 how to stack 4 eggs, a laptop, a book, and a pear. And it shat the bed, had no idea. It's like put an egg down and put the laptop on top of it and put the pear on top of that. I asked ChatGPT 4 how to do it. And it said, put the laptop on the ground, it'll be a strong base, put the 4 eggs, one on each corner, put the book on top, and then put the pear on top of that, something like that. He was saying to the host, I could not sleep that night because I couldn't believe that it answered that question the way it answered it, with reasoning and judgment. It's never seen a pear. It's never seen a laptop. It's like, how did it know? And I just got goosebumps listening to this podcast. But so I thought, that's it. Fuck, these things can they can reason, not only reason, but reason about things like objects in physical space that I've never seen. I think this research paper is really interesting and maybe very telling. Hooman, have you had a chance to look at this paper or look at news about it? What are you thinking upon hearing about this?
I think first and foremost, you have to, we've been at Collective and following this because I'll tell you, when the early models pre-GPT, I think it was like 3.5 turbo, for our use cases, and a lot of them around tax and accounting, and I'd say some more rote tasks, they actually weren't as effective and they weren't working. And working can be defined by some sort of benchmark. And then past 3.5 turbo, all of a sudden we saw this like massive uplift. So one thing that's clear is that the folks at OpenAI continue to get feedback and continue to make these models better and better and better. I think there is an overgeneralization from people that the GPT model, generative pre-trained transformers, is like the end all be all of AI. It is part of AI research and it's multifaceted. So there's vision, there's different disciplines. They're obviously using ML models and, you can use deeper multi-layered neural networks, but there's a lot. There's OCR, there's like all voice
diffusion models.
And so when you look at this as a concert and you say to yourself, if I was to assemble this into a symphony orchestra, could I do some really interesting things? One of which is, could you create a multi-engine architecture, right? And each of these being a service layer with maybe an LLM at the front that would then use these on the back end and create some sort of approximate intelligence reasoning. The answer is, okay, that's what I think is interesting. Now, is Sam, our OpenAI, going to do that with their GPT model? And then ultimately they are playing in some of these other subdisciplines, right? They're working, for example, I believe with some of these robotic companies like Figure and others where that model is in there and using vision and so on and so forth. So I think it's interesting. And I'm sure that the Apple paper, I looked at it and it looked generally correct. So I would say 2 things. One is they'll probably upgrade the model to reason better. I think one of the most interesting understated things that OpenAI has done is the memory and the context windows that they're creating. Like, I don't know about you, but like I've had some like really freaky experiences and we came from like early days of the web. First, back for people that are as old as we are, every ad was not personalized. It was all like punch the monkey, flooding it with the same shit. Now you're seeing ads based on your browsing details. They know who you are. And it's very, very limited window. And the memory is quote unquote, is the cookie on your machine. Now they're saying, all right, we're going to create a context window and you can use that. So for example, I have a daughter. And it now knows I have a daughter. It knows how old she is. It knows things about me. I can see it. It says it's adding it to memory. And so the reason human beings are impressive is not just, it's a multifaceted approach to problem solving. And I think they're going to have to integrate more approaches into their, model. And I think it's going to work out. I think they're going to figure it out. Sure, maybe Apple's right now, but it is a monumental achievement what they've done. And whether just a large language model in and of itself can solve the problem of reasoning intelligence, it's not the right question. The question is, can we, with the ensemble of different approaches, create a new, call it super agent that leverages multiple approaches so we can have a reasoning agent? And the answer is 100% yes, in my opinion. It's not a question of can we do it? It's a question of when can we do it and who's going to be first.
I think that's super interesting. I really like the term you're using around this, like the orchestra, right? The orchestra of models. I've heard Sam actually talk about this in both ways. He's talked about, basically the ChatGPT interface is a sort of collection of models, and that it uses the right model for the right job. Especially if you ask it to generate an image, for example, it's using the DALL-E
Correct.
model, which is embedded inside the standard GPT-4 model. Or rather, it's being invoked by it, let's say. And so in some cases, in some places, I've heard him say, this is about a system of models wrapped around a user experience, right? Or a user experience wrapped around a system of models. But at the same time, I've heard him say, it's like he seems to have some kind of faith that, no, if you just keep throwing more and more and more data at an LLM, it will ultimately become the super generalized model of all time. And he just believes like there's really no end in sight to how smart this gets in and of itself, some unified fundamental model. And so, maybe the first thing is a stopgap. It's like, let's get it as far as we can with orchestration while we're just pumping this, building bigger and bigger and bigger models. But they're running out of data, so who knows where that goes.
Well, the GPT model, though, yes and no, right? Because the original, if you just look at how those transformers work, they're based on the insight that was derived from Google's type-ahead search, where you're doing basically you're probabilistically figuring out what the next token is, right? That's not what they're doing only, right? They're going to parse effectively, you're going to predict it, but then they're kind of saying, okay, I'm going to route, what kind of problem are you asking me to solve, right? Are you asking me to generate an image? Are you asking me to do a web search? And they have to contextualize it. So definitionally, they're not just going to have like this quote unquote one model. Now,
no, but what I'm saying is right now they're doing what you describe.
Yeah.
But he's also saying, he seems to be also hinting that there are not going to be hundreds of models. There's going to be one super intelligence, and it's just a matter of scale.
It could be. I would agree, because fundamentally evolution has proven that to be true. You have a base neural network inside of the brain. Now, we don't even understand how the brain works, but fundamentally, when you look at it from a reductionist point of view, bottoms up, right? You have neurons, synapses, axons, and there's a connection there, right? And so if you look at it from that foundational point of view, can there be quote unquote one model at that level of abstraction? And if it's connected properly and so on and so forth, but even the brain has areas of specialization. Even the brain has multiple areas and so on and so forth. So I guess the question, I agree with him that you could create this model and you can have an emergent intelligence from that level of model, but it does subspecialize from an emergent perspective, in the brain. We don't know how, whether it's like Wernicke's area for speech or these different areas. And so I think he's probably right that there is some possibility of a substrate for that. But then, okay, we have to talk about memory. We have to talk about this idea of consciousness. Like you need a buffer space between, okay, I'm talking to you right now. So I'm taking in all these inputs from my senses. I'm not actually processing and talking to you in real time. There's a slight delay, right? We just don't perceive that. I'm taking an input. I create this model. There is no Chris. Like I'm making this up. Like, I don't know what you actually look like at the scale of the universe. If you want to get down to the science level, I'm using it based on my sensors. A dog will see a different Chris. A bee will see a different Chris. Like there is no absolute Chris. It's all relative to my model. And so, yes, he's right in that sense. I think scientifically you can go there. I don't know if the GPT, like the transformer itself, that technical approach is the correct approach, I guess is what I'm saying. And I don't know if you need it right now. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you can probably do this orchestra of existing specialized models, getting you pretty far. But there's a company, and I don't want to like blow up, but there's a company I'm working on now that has done a verifiable biological like model of the brain. And it's very different. One of the properties of this model is that you don't need back propagation as much, which means you can save a ton of power and you can do real-time processing of voice, real-time processing of ideas in a way that the transform model can't do. So whether or not the model of this new company that I'm, kind of working on is correct or false, the point is there are other ways of looking at this. It'll be interesting. I think we're just in some ways, the early innings. It's just a very fast game.
It's a technology cycle for the TikTok generation, right?
Yes, that's a great way of saying it. It's wild how fast it's going. It's doubling every 3.5 months in terms of the efficacy per those benchmarks. And it's just thinking at that scale as a human being is challenging. I remember we were sitting with a bunch of guys who were entrepreneurs in LA. Garrett was there actually. And we were talking about when everything started getting fast. I mean, there was this moment, I can't remember when it was, but again, probably a little after 3.5 turbo, we just started seeing it. And it felt like, we're like, wow, this is as fundamental a shift as the internet. But unlike the internet, where like, at least from my cohort, we were like filled with hope about all the applications, we're filled with some level of anxiety too, because you can't quite forecast. Like I can't quite visualize 20 years from now. There's too many curves compounding.
Or you can, and we've seen it in the science fiction movies, and it's terrifying. And so it's both, right? You can't forecast how we avoid all landmines, and or worse, many writers and creatives have forecasted how it goes wrong. And so it really fires the imagination, and it really triggers a lot of anxiety for us. And, you know, the closer this machinery looks to a human being, the more, you know, we start maybe getting into the uncanny valley of like repulsion, like, get the fuck away from me. Like, you are trying to be me. And so now, you know, if you see these movies where there's like clones or duplicates that show up, it's creepy as hell, right? And you have now a computing layer, a substrate, an artificial not consciousness, but an artificial cognition. Then you look at it and you're like, that's amazing and horrifying at the same time. I am no longer, or I can see a day when my humanity is no longer unique in the universe. You put aside all the pragmatic economics and, you know, misinformation or whatever, just the uncanny valley of, wow, we have cloned our uniqueness into bits, you know, versus atoms is crazy to think about.
I'll give you a slightly different perspective. I think that every human being is fundamentally unique in the most definitional sense of it and as an intelligence. I think the question is not, in my opinion, whether we'll be unique. It is, now you can see a world where, from an economic point of view, for example, is that uniqueness going to drive the same value? And if it does not, what does that mean for me? Because our society is driven by like so much of it through this like capitalistic intent. And so if some machine can do 80% of what I can do at a pretty damn good price, what is the implication for me? I think there's some fear there, but you know, I don't think the science fiction stuff I think it's so wrong. It's laughable. I think like the Terminator scenario is so laughable.
I'm saying something slightly different, which is put aside the economic piece of it, which will cause disruption and productivity and abundance and all of that stuff. And put aside the uniqueness at the individual human level. I'm talking about humans have for our entire existence perceived ourselves to be at the top of the food chain as it relates to intelligence in the universe, the known intelligence in the universe. And we are, for the first time, encountering glimmers of intelligence embodied in an entity that is not of our category, human being, right? The more that this intelligence becomes embodied in robotics and whatever, and anthropomorphized, again, to draw on science fiction, if you ever seen the Animatrix, where they talk about the origins of the Matrix, people started to taunt and bully and be revolted by robots, and because their humanness was, in the general, not their uniqueness in the specific, but in the general, was almost called into question, as well as their economic purpose was called into question. And so I'm talking about kind of this existential philosophical angst we might start to encounter. In a previous episode, we talked about the opposite, which is people start to imbue these things with agency and feelings and start to fight like robot rights, like there's slavery and we should defend them. And you could imagine the opposite, where the people start to feel an affinity for them. And the people who, you know, think of them as objects and those who think of them as creatures actually start to argue that in really meaningful ways. So these are very existential things I'm talking about now. We're kind of off the beaten track in terms of pragmatic.
Actually, I think it's very pragmatic, and I'm gonna actually credit you. I think, you know, I was talk that they were talking about alignment, you know, and this is a topic that is probably like, I wouldn't say for everyday people when you're talking about AI. It's not something that they care about. How do we align AI with our interests? Okay, fundamentally, the way you do it is if they need a role. It needs to be part of the fabric. Show me a society where you put someone in a role where they're subservient, where they're consistently lower than you, and when that outcome has ended up without some sort of conflict.
They need to be enfranchised.
So I think from an alignment perspective, you have to start thinking about
coexistence.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually think the reason why I think a lot of science fiction is off is I'll put a grim version and I'll go hopeful. The grim version is this. Terminator is a joke. Like they're not we anthropomorphize these things. Oh, the advanced version of AI will be robots and they'll walk and they'll do everything we do. That's a joke. What the robots can do if they get to a point is they'll say, I'm going to go get some CRISPR stuff. oh, I read about this COVID thing. I'm going to go ahead and start a super violent disease and I'm just going to spread it all over, that's it. You're gone like that. I don't need to deal with it. You are fundamentally built on this biological hardware, which I can write software for, and I can release this virus and that, right?
But
If they wanted
just to be clear, when you say it's a joke, you don't mean the scenario that the AI chooses to take over is a joke.
we cannot fight them.
You're saying the implementation details are a joke.
Yeah.
There's no need for bullets and battles and nukes. There's a biological war they can wage against us that we have no
What are
hope
you
of winning.
fighting when you're fighting? We created a distributed infrastructure called the internet with redundant computing and redundant power. We're doing it because we want to protect ourselves, right? That is going to be the creature you're fighting, right? It is fundamentally not stored in one place. It is super intelligent and it knows everything that's weak about us when we are hardware. Like you might nuke one area and then it just, oh, well, I backed myself up over there, right? So
That's right.
that's my grim version of it. But I also think that what we're missing is we as a society, technology is our invention, right? It is an emergent property of an intelligent and conscious being, right? When you have technology, and we are, in my opinion, moving towards it. And this might be the utopian, I don't remember what's that thing that they always do, the ECC, or I always forget what
EAC and
whatever it is, right? Okay. But like fundamentally, how many hours a day do people spend with their phone? And if you want to be brutal, how much do you spend in front of a screen? Most of your waking hours are in front of a screen. What we are electing to do right now is we are already on path to merge with technology. And I will argue in the next generation, first it'll be like, oh, I'll have them my AirPods and I'll be talking to this agent, but eventually a brain computer interfaces and eventually be like in your eyes. And all these technologies are happening at the same time. So we just anthropomorphize and take AI and say, oh, it's going to exist external to us and be a robot. It's like, no, dude, this is going to be closer and closer. Like our kids will be walking around and Google Maps. So they'll be able to walk anywhere they want. They'll just know where to go because of like augmented reality and AI and all these things. And it can become symbiotic is what I'm saying.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we wanted to talk about this in our last topic. Elon Musk's vision for Neuralink is exactly this, right? And we wanted to touch on Elon talking to Putin, but we're going to run out of time here. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the Musk answer is we need to find a way to merge with this thing as fast as possible or we're screwed. And so
I don't think we do. I think we will.
You don't think we do what?
In my opinion, some people believe history can be made by individuals. Some people think it's inevitable. It's kind of like the Asimov. You look at Foundation as an example, like how much of it is probabilistic waves driven by the masses of humanity. It was kind of inspired by macroeconomics, economics, the psychohistory thing.
It's kind of like almost the Messiah worldview, which is, I think, very Christian or religious.
Elon
or
Musk
Abrahamic.
or someone is going to save us. But my point of view is that avatar, that character will come because of the fundamental like shift in needs. So I can't guarantee you that we're going to get through. There is going to be a reckoning at some point, but I don't think it's going to be this moment, this like Skynet is on. And then we're like, there's this phase shift that we're like, oh, it's us and them and they're awake. I think it's going to be like one of these things where we're slowly from the perspective of we're not going to see it, right? Like look at Google. Can you drive anywhere, Chris, without Google Maps?
I think the analogy here is it's going to look more like the US and China than humans and Skynet. It's these two emerging powers, or in this case, an emerging power in China, and meeting economically, technologically, whatever. I think what you're describing is that this power, this alien creature, is going to slowly emerge. And it's, as you said, the alignment problem is going to need to be enfranchised. It's going to need to be given a role. We're going to find ways of coexisting with it. There may be flashpoints of conflict or confusion or pain, suffering economically.
Like the Waymo stuff that was happening downtown. Remember where people were like beating up the car or whatever? But like, you mark my words, those people are beating up their car. Their kids are not going to drive in a car. They're going to be driving in a Waymo or something. You know what I mean? Like the Luddites, back in industrial evolution who are, oh my gosh, this is the worst. 80% of our economy is agrarian. Those people's kids now are the people who are picketing and saying, don't close down our factories with automation. And so it's going to keep happening. My optimistic view is it'll happen because it has to. And I think that humans find a way. And I believe that there are some statistical phase transitions that we have to navigate as a group, and we'll do our best to do it. But look at how far humanity has come and look at what we're doing. And yeah, there can be some setbacks, but I think AI is not alien it is us. We are creating tools that are intrinsically us, and it will merge with us in a way that makes sense over a period of time. In 100 years, I don't believe that humanity as it exists today is going to exist at the scale that it does. I think it's going to be very, very different. And it's not a bad thing. it's okay. It's like, would we be upset? Like, we didn't exist, right? We're a relatively new species. So if you use the argument like humanity has an intrinsic right to exist as it is today, then we shouldn't be here. We took it from, the previous species, and we're like, you know what I mean? So, and it doesn't have to be violent.
Yeah, there's that. If you look at it kind of in a more abstract way, the question is only whether life and cognition and intelligence exists. There's nothing saying it has to be embodied in the Homo sapien, in the human race. And so there's going to be an evolution that occurs, that might be a merger of, a change of the guard, whatever. And, life will continue. Life will find a way. It may not, and it will not look like it looks today. And trying to hold onto that with the genie back in the bottle is actually impossible.
It's impossible.
So we need to embrace it and participate in it optimistically. All right, those are our thoughts about, can LLMs reason, and what is the future of humanity, and how do we coexist with these embodied AIs? Are we going to fall in love with them? Are we going to defend them? Are we going to fight with them? Is it going to be like the rise of China, where we have to find a way to coexist with them? So many possibilities. Jump in the comments and let us know your thoughts. Hooman, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We're going to have you on much more often. How can people find you on the internet, follow your work, and get connected with you?
Well, I have good news for you, Chris. My name is Hooman, so I'm very Googleable. I have great, SEO. I'm at Hooman Radfar on most social media platforms. I was about to say Twitter, X, Instagram, and I'm also, you can just email me, Hooman@Collective. So happy to always continue this discussion. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And just to be clear, that's Hooman with a Hooman. So
you got it.
You can also find me on all the social media, all the places at Chris Saad, or at my website, chrissaad.com, and chrissaad.com/newsletter. Hooman, an absolute pleasure. Hopefully you had fun.
I had a blast, man. I loved it.
Thanks for listening in, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.